My name is Isabella, though most folks just call me Isa, and from the first moment I gazed through a dusty, borrowed telescope as a wide-eyed child and saw the shimmering, impossible rings of Saturn hanging like a celestial jewel in the inky void, the vast, silent, star-strewn expanse of the universe became my everything. At 28, armed with a PhD in astrophysics and an unshakable, almost devotional passion for unraveling cosmic mysteries, I was a junior research fellow at the somewhat neglected but historically significant Mount Veridian Public Observatory. It was a place of majestic aging telescopes, chronic underfunding, and a dedicated, if often weary team who believed fiercely in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. My most fervent, all-consuming dream was not just to make a significant astronomical discovery, but to do so in a way that championed open, collaborative public science, securing a brighter future for our beloved, struggling observatory, and inspiring a new generation to look up in wonder. And I was on the very cusp of that dream. I had developed a novel, incredibly cost-effective digital image, stacking and noise reduction technique that could, I theorized, allow our older telescopes to detect the faint, almost imperceptible transit signals of distant exoplanets, something previously thought impossible without multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art equipment. Then, after months of painstaking, often solitary late-night observations, I found it the unmistakable recurring dimming of a distant sun-like star, the telltale signature of a planet potentially Earth-sized orbiting within its habitable zone. Kepler Isa 1. I provisionally, secretly, thrillingly named it. But I never ever, in my most cynical, jaded imaginings, conceived that the greatest, most insidious threat to this breathtaking, potentially world-altering discovery, and to the very principles of ethical science I held so dear, would emerge not from the vast, indifferent cosmos, but from the hallowed, supposedly collegial halls of my own department, specifically from my brilliant, ambitious, powerfully connected, and utterly, chillingly ruthless department head Professor Julian Thorne. The memory of his initial feigned skepticism, his subsequent calculated systematic appropriation of my work, and the brazen public theft of my celestial child still leaves a taste of bitter cosmic ash in my mouth. Before I take you on an astronomical journey to the very edge of known science, before I unravel the infuriating, heartbreaking story of how a man lauded as a titan of astrophysics callously attempted to hijack my life's work for his own insatiable ambition and personal glory, and before I recount the desperate high-stakes battle I waged against overwhelming odds, armed with little more than raw data, unwavering conviction, and the quiet support of a few true allies to expose his academic fraud on the world's most prestigious astronomical stage, a confrontation that ultimately left his carefully constructed facade of brilliance visibly catastrophically crumbling, I'd be so incredibly grateful if you could let me know which star system, or at least which part of planet Earth you're tuning in from today in the comments section below. And please, I earnestly implore you do hit that like button. If you've ever poured every ounce of your intellect, your passion, and your very soul into a groundbreaking idea or a deeply personal discovery, only to face the devastating threat of having it stolen or discredited by someone in a position of power and trust. Mount Veridian Public Observatory. My beloved Mount Veridian. It wasn't just a workplace. It was a sanctuary, a majestic, time-worn temple dedicated to the silent, patient observation of the cosmos. Its iconic silver domes often gleaming under the crisp, clear mountain air, or dusted with winter snow-housed telescopes that, while no longer cutting-edge, possessed a rich history of significant astronomical contributions. The air within its echoing halls always smelled faintly of old books, polished brass, and the cool, metallic tang of sophisticated electronics. But it was also a place of perennial struggle, of constantly battling for meager research grants, of making do with outdated equipment, of watching helplessly as more funding and prestige flowed to newer, flashier, often privately backed institutions. My innovative image processing technique, developed over 2 years of intensive self-directed coding and countless frustrating trial and error sessions on my aging personal laptop, was born directly out of this necessity. A desperate attempt to level the playing field, to give our grand old telescopes a new lease on life, to prove that groundbreaking science could still emerge from places like Mount Veridian. And then it happened. One cold pre-dawn Tuesday in late October, after weeks of meticulously calibrating my software and patiently observing a carefully selected target star, a G-type main sequence star much like our own sun-designated KC 8462852, located some 470 light-years away in the constellation Cygnus. My algorithms, sifting through terabytes of subtle light curve data, flagged it a tiny, almost imperceptible, but distinctly periodic dip in the star's brightness. A transit. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, exultant drumbeat in the pre-dawn stillness of the control room. Over the subsequent nights, with trembling hands and bated breath, I gathered more data. The dips were consistent, repeating with a precise regularity that suggested an orbital period of approximately 385 Earth days. The depth of the transit hinted at a planet roughly 1.5 times the size of Earth, placing it squarely within the super-Earth category. And most thrillingly, most astoundingly, its orbital distance placed it tantalizingly within the star's habitable zone, the Goldilocks region, where temperatures could potentially allow for liquid water, the essential ingredient for life as we know it. Kepler Isa 1, I whispered to the silent listening universe, a tear tracing a cold path down my cheek. It was a provisional designation, a secret placeholder, a tiny hopeful claim staked in the vast cosmic wilderness. I had found something potentially extraordinary. My first most immediate instinct, after the initial wave of dizzying euphoria began to subside, was to share my astonishing, albeit still preliminary findings with my department head, Professor Julian Thorne. He was a towering figure in astrophysics, a man whose early career discoveries had earned him international acclaim, a powerful voice on national funding committees, and the undisputed, often intimidating leader of our department. I revered his intellect, even if I sometimes found his aloof, almost regal demeanor somewhat unsettling. I meticulously prepared a concise presentation. The light curves, the preliminary orbital calculations, a detailed explanation of my novel image processing technique, and my urgent request for dedicated follow-up observation time on Mount Viridian's largest instrument, the 2.5-meter Hale-Thorne reflector, ironically partly named after one of his distant, more philanthropic ancestors, to confirm the planet's existence and begin characterizing its atmosphere. Professor Thorne listened to my nervous, impassioned presentation in his grand book-lined office, his steepled fingers resting lightly against his lips, his expression an unreadable mask of polite scholarly attention. He asked a few perfunctory, surprisingly dismissive questions about my methodology, probed for potential sources of instrumental error with what felt like undue skepticism, and then with a faint, almost pitying smile, he delivered his verdict. "Intriguing, Dr. Morales," he said, his voice smooth and resonant, using my formal title in a way that suddenly felt distancing rather than respectful. "A commendable piece of independent initiative with your software. However," he paused, his eyes usually so sharp and incisive, now strangely hooded, "I must caution you against premature excitement. These faint signals, especially from older instruments like ours, are notoriously prone to false positives, instrumental artifacts, stellar activity masquerading as transits. Your data, while suggestive, is frankly far too noisy, far too statistically marginal at this stage to warrant any significant reallocation of our already oversubscribed prime telescope time." My heart, which had been soaring with such hopeful anticipation, plummeted into an icy abyss of disappointment. He suggested I continue to refine my technique and gather more baseline data on other, less ambitious targets. He then, almost as an afterthought, requested that I provide his senior research assistant, Dr. Peterson, with a full detailed copy of my image processing algorithms and all my raw observational data on KC 8462852 for independent verification, and to ensure, he added with another faint, unreadable smile, that we explore all potential avenues, however unlikely. Reluctantly feeling a profound sense of deflation, but still clinging to a desperate shred of hope that he might eventually see the potential, I complied, meticulously documenting everything. The following weeks were a torment of frustration and a growing, insidious unease. My repeated, increasingly urgent requests for even a few precious hours of observation time on the Hale-Thorne reflector to follow up on Kepler Isa 1 were consistently, inexplicably denied or endlessly deferred, always with vague excuses about previously scheduled high-priority, externally funded projects, or unexpected essential maintenance. Professor Thorne himself became increasingly aloof, almost entirely inaccessible. His office door perpetually closed his responses to my emails when they came at all, brief, dismissive, and non-committal. Meanwhile, I noticed with a chilling sense of foreboding that Dr. Peterson Thorne's assistant was spending an unusual amount of time huddled in hushed, secretive conversations with Thorne, and was frequently seen accessing the very telescope control systems and data archives I was now effectively barred from. A cold, sick feeling began to coalesce in the pit of my stomach. Then, approximately 3 agonizing months after my initial presentation to him, the official university press office issued a stunning, high-profile media advisory. Professor Julian Thorne and his prestigious research team were poised to announce a truly groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting, astronomical discovery of profound global significance at a major specially convened press conference the following week. No further details were provided, only tantalizing hints of new worlds and answers to humanity's oldest questions. My heart, already heavy with suspicion, clenched with an icy, visceral dread. I knew with a sickening, soul-crushing certainty that transcended mere intuition exactly what he was about to announce. He was going to steal my planet. He was going to steal Kepler Isa 1. The press conference was a meticulously orchestrated, high-gloss media spectacle. Professor Julian Thorne, resplendent in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the bright television lights, stood at a podium adorned with the university's prestigious crest, and with an air of profound, almost reverent solemnity, announced to a captivated room of science journalists and a global online audience the historic discovery by his dedicated research team of a potentially habitable Earth-sized exoplanet orbiting a sun-like star in the Cygnus constellation. He unveiled stunning, professionally rendered artists' impressions of this new world, which he had a tad presumptuously yet effectively already christened Thorne's planet. The orbital parameters, the estimated size, the characteristics of the host star, every critical detail he presented with such theatrical flourish was an almost perfect, chilling echo of my own preliminary findings for Kepler Isa 1. He, even with an audacity that literally took my breath away and made me feel physically ill, alluded to a novel, internally developed data processing technique that had been instrumental in teasing out the faint planetary signal from the observatory's venerable yet still capable instrumentation. My technique, my Kepler Isa 1, my discovery, stolen, brazenly, publicly, and it seemed triumphantly. I watched the live stream from the cold, desolate quiet of my small campus office, a wave of nausea, disbelief, and a searing, impotent fury washing over me in suffocating waves. He didn't even have the decency to acknowledge my initial work, not even a footnote, not even a polite, dismissive mention of a junior researcher's preliminary, inconclusive observations. I had been, it was terrifyingly clear, entirely systematically erased from my own discovery narrative. In the immediate dizzying aftermath, as accolades and grant offers began to pour into Professor Thorne's office, and the university basked in the reflected, unearned glory of his monumental achievement, I tried desperately to make my voice heard. I compiled my original time-stamped research notes, my meticulously documented software algorithms, my raw data logs clearly predating his team's supposed discovery, and I formally presented them first to Thorne himself, who dismissed them with a cool, almost pitying smile, vaguely suggesting I was perhaps confused or overly attached to early statistically insignificant artifacts, then to the university's ethics committee, and finally in a state of near despair to the dean of sciences. The response was a chilling, almost united front of institutional indifference, polite stonewalling, and thinly veiled threats. Thorne, a powerful rainmaking academic with an international reputation and strong ties to major funding bodies, was an invaluable asset to the university. I, a junior untenured research fellow with a controversial, unsubstantiated claim, was, it became painfully apparent, entirely expendable. The dean, a man I had once respected for his scientific integrity, advised me in no uncertain terms to consider the potential long-term ramifications for my career if I were to pursue these unfounded and divisive allegations any further. I was in essence warned to be silent, to accept the injustice or face professional ruin. The isolation was profound, the sense of betrayal absolute. But the thought of letting Thorne get away with this colossal act of academic theft, of allowing him to build his already inflated reputation on the foundations of my stolen labor, of seeing the true story of Kepler-Isa 1's discovery buried forever, was simply unbearable. The universe I knew operated on principles of truth and evidence, even if my own academic department seemingly did not. If the institution wouldn't help me, I would have to find another way. My first hesitant call was to Dr. Eris Thorne, no direct relation to Julian, a fact he often wryly pointed out, but a distinguished older and somewhat marginalized astrophysicist in a neighboring, less prestigious university, known for his fierce intellectual independence, his quiet integrity, and his outspoken criticism of what he termed the creeping corporatization and cult of personality in modern academia. He had been an external examiner on my PhD thesis and had shown a genuine interest in my innovative data processing work. He listened to my entire tearful, indignant account without interruption, his silence more understanding than that of anyone I had yet spoken to. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, his voice filled with a weary anger, "Isabella, my dear, I am not entirely surprised, though I am, as always, profoundly disgusted. Julian Thorne has always been a man of considerable ambition and flexible ethics. But this is beyond the pale. You have been grievously wronged, and more importantly, scientific truth has been subverted." He didn't offer easy solutions, but he offered something far more precious: his unwavering belief, his moral support, and crucially access to his university's modest but functional remote observatory, and a small network of like-minded, independent-spirited astronomers scattered across the globe, many of whom had also felt the sting of the academic establishment's indifference or injustice. And so began my clandestine, desperate, almost quixotic quest to independently verify the existence of Kepler-Isa 1 and somehow reclaim my discovery. With Dr. Eris Thorne's quiet, strategic guidance and the incredibly generous, often risky collaboration of a small international consortium of fellow under-resourced but passionately dedicated astronomers, a brilliant young postdoc in Chile with access to a slightly larger telescope during engineering downtime, a retired amateur astronomer in Arizona with an incredibly well-equipped backyard observatory, a data processing whiz in India, who offered to help refine my algorithms further, we began to painstakingly, meticulously gather new observational data on KC 8462852. It was a challenging, frustrating, and often disheartening endeavor. We were pooling scraps of precious telescope time, often observing under less than ideal conditions, battling against limited funding, institutional skepticism, and the ever-present fear of Julian Thorne discovering our efforts and finding new ways to obstruct us. He and his well-funded team, meanwhile, were churning out press releases, giving TED Talks, and preparing their first glossy, high-profile, though I suspected fundamentally flawed paper on Thorne's planet for a prestigious journal. Simultaneously, with the help of a tech-savvy childhood friend, now a cybersecurity expert, I began a discreet, ethically cautious, but deeply necessary search for digital evidence that might prove Julian Thorne had accessed or misused my original unpublished work. We meticulously examined server logs from Mount Viridian, to which I still had limited traceable access, as a fellow searched for traces of my unique algorithms in any publicly available preprint versions of Thorne's team's work, and even analyzed the subtle digital watermarks embedded in my original data files. It felt like searching for a single specific grain of cosmic dust in a vast echoing nebula. Weeks turned into months. The pressure was immense. My meager savings dwindled. My official research at Mount Viridian was effectively stalled, my presence there increasingly uncomfortable, my colleagues, most of whom either believed Thorne or were too intimidated to offer support, avoiding my gaze. There were many dark nights when I almost gave up, when the sheer scale of Thorne's power and the injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But then I would remember the breathtaking, undeniable beauty of Kepler-Isa 1's faint, hopeful signal in my original data. I would think of Alara Vance from Maya's story, or Sophia's fight for Azure Eden, and a fresh surge of stubborn, defiant resolve would course through me. The stars themselves, in their silent, ancient wisdom, seemed to be whispering, "Truth will out." I just had to find a way to help it shine. The breakthrough, when it finally gloriously came, was twofold, a 1-2 punch of irrefutable evidence that hit with the force of a celestial alignment. First, after months of painstaking collaborative, often frustratingly interrupted observations using our ad hoc global network of modest telescopes and my continually refined image stacking algorithms, our small dedicated team spearheaded by the brilliant Chilean postdoc Dr. Eva Rostova, independently, unequivocally, and with even higher statistical significance than my original detection, confirmed the existence, orbital period, and approximate size of the exoplanet orbiting KIC 8462852. We had it. Kepler ISA 1 was real, its subtle rhythmic heartbeat echoing across the light years, now captured not just by me, but by a chorus of independent verifiable witnesses. The sheer, unadulterated joy of that confirmation, shared over a crackly, triumphant international video call with my newfound, fiercely loyal colleagues, was an emotion so pure, so potent, it momentarily eclipsed all the preceding months of pain and struggle. But the second breakthrough, the one that would prove crucial in exposing Professor Julian Thorne's egregious academic misconduct, was the true smoking gun, a discovery so damning it made my own heart pound with a mixture of vindication and trepidation. My cybersecurity expert friend Liam, after weeks of meticulous, frustratingly complex digital forensics, finally unearthed it, a series of inadvertently preserved time-stamped server access logs from the Mount Veridian Observatory's internal network. These logs clearly, irrefutably showed that Professor Thorne's senior research assistant, Dr. Peterson, had accessed my password-protected, unpublished research directory, the one containing all my raw data, my detailed methodology, and the complete source code for my proprietary image processing algorithms, on multiple occasions beginning just days after I had reluctantly shared my initial findings with Thorne, and weeks before Thorne's team supposedly began their independent observations of KIC 8462852. Furthermore, Liam found evidence that specific uniquely named data files and code snippets from my directory had been copied to a secure server exclusively used by Thorne's inner circle. There, it was undeniable proof of unauthorized access and direct appropriation of my intellectual property. He hadn't just been inspired by my work, he had systematically, covertly stolen its very heart and soul. Armed with this powerful two-pronged arsenal, our independently verified confirmation of Kepler ISA 1 and the irrefutable digital evidence of Thorne's academic theft, Dr. Eris Thorne, Professor Rostova, and I, along with our other key collaborators, meticulously prepared a comprehensive scientific paper. It detailed not only our definitive findings on the exoplanet, which we with a quiet shared satisfaction formally proposed to name Veridian 1 in honor of the public observatory where its first faint whispers were detected, but also in a carefully worded but unambiguous supplementary methods section the full unvarnished timeline of its discovery, including my initial detection, the subsequent institutional obstruction I faced, and a summary of the digital forensic evidence. We knew that submitting this paper to a high-impact peer-reviewed journal known for its rigorous ethical standards was crucial. But we also knew that the slow process of academic publishing might not be enough to prevent Julian Thorne from further cementing his false claim to the discovery, especially with his lavishly funded PR machine already in full swing. We needed a bigger, more immediate stage to unveil the full truth. The upcoming Triennial General Assembly of the International Astronomical Union, IAU, the world's most prestigious gathering of astronomers, was just 6 weeks away. It was a long shot, but Dr. Eris Thorne, using his remaining vestiges of influence and calling in decades-old favors, managed to secure us a coveted slot for a late-breaking oral presentation in a prominent plenary session. The title of our presentation was deliberately anodyne: New Observational Data and Analysis of KIC 8462852 and its Planetary Companion. No hint of the academic bombshell we were about to drop. The atmosphere in the vast IAU Assembly Hall on the day of our presentation was electric, though not initially for us. Julian Thorne himself had delivered a keynote address just the day before, basking in the adulation for his recent discovery of Thorne's planet, confidently predicting further groundbreaking revelations from his ongoing research. He was there in the front row, flanked by his university's beaming dean and PR team, looking every inch the celebrated titan of astrophysics. My stomach churned with a potent cocktail of nerves, righteous anger, and a desperate, fragile hope. Dr. Eris Thorne opened our presentation, his voice calm measured, but with an underlying current of steel. He first laid out with impeccable scientific rigor our team's independent multi-observatory confirmation of Viridian 1, presenting our stunning new light curves and refined orbital parameters. A murmur of impressed interest rippled through the packed hall. Then he paused, looked directly at Julian Thorne, and his voice took on a new, harder edge. However, he continued, the silence in the hall suddenly absolute. The story of this particular exoplanet's discovery is regrettably more complex, and indeed more troubling than initially presented to this esteemed body. He then ceded the podium to me. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack. But as I stepped forward, as I looked out at the sea of expectant curious, and in some cases like Julian Thorne's suddenly very wary faces, a strange, unexpected calm descended upon me. I thought of Kepler-Isa 1, Viridian 1, my distant, beautiful, stolen star child, and I found my voice. I began by presenting my original time-stamped discovery data from Mount Viridian, my innovative image processing technique explained in clear, accessible detail. Then, with methodical, almost surgical precision, I laid out the timeline of events, my initial presentation to Professor Thorne, his dismissive response, the subsequent denial of telescope time, the suspicious emergence of his team's discovery, and finally projected onto the enormous screen behind me for all the world to see the damning, irrefutable digital forensic evidence of unauthorized access and data appropriation from my research files by his assistant under his clear direction. Gasps, then a rising, shocked murmur swept through the auditorium. I saw Julian Thorne's face, once so confident and ruddy drain of all color, becoming a ghastly, mottled white. His jaw sagged, his eyes darted around a _S as if seeking an escape route. The dean beside him looked horrified, his face a mask of dawning, appalled comprehension. The pale face's moment was not just his. It was a collective recoil from a betrayal of scientific trust that struck at the very heart of their shared profession. The fallout was immediate, seismic, and utterly devastating for Julian Thorne. The Quanda session that followed our presentation was less a scientific discussion and more an unofficial impromptu ethics inquiry, with prominent astronomers from around the globe rising to demand explanations, to condemn the apparent misconduct, to express solidarity with me. Thorne, when finally compelled to speak, was a stammering, incoherent wreck, his usual eloquence deserting him entirely, his desperate, transparent attempts at denial and deflection only digging him into a deeper hole. An emergency ethics investigation was immediately launched by the IAU itself, and within days by his own shamed university. His lavish grants were frozen, his prestigious international collaborations suspended, his upcoming publications retracted. Thorne's planet became a notorious byword for academic fraud. In the ensuing months, the truth, as it always eventually does, fully triumphed. Our comprehensive paper on Viridian 1, including the meticulously documented account of its true discovery, was fast-tracked for publication in a leading astrophysical journal. I, Isabella Isa Morales. The once dismissed junior researcher from the underfunded public observatory was rightfully globally acknowledged as the primary discoverer of Viridian 1 and the innovator of the groundbreaking technique that had made its detection possible. Funding, respect, and exciting new research opportunities began to flow not just to me personally, but more importantly to my beloved Mount Viridian Observatory, allowing us to upgrade our venerable telescopes and expand our vital public outreach programs. The sweetest revenge I discovered wasn't just seeing Julian Thorne's glittering, ill-gotten career implode under the weight of his own hubris and deceit, though there was, I had to admit, a certain profound, almost cosmic satisfaction in witnessing the ultimate triumph of scientific integrity. No, the truly sweetest, most enduring victory was the reaffirmation of the power of open, ethical, collaborative science. It was the messages of support I received from countless other young, often struggling researchers around the world who had faced similar, if less dramatic, battles against entrenched academic hierarchies. It was the renewed sense of purpose and pride at Mount Viridian. It was knowing that Viridian 1, my distant beautiful planet, was now a symbol not of theft, but of truth reclaimed, a tiny, hopeful beacon in the vast, impartial universe, reminding us all that even the faintest signals, whether from distant stars or from silenced voices, can with courage, perseverance, and a little help from true allies eventually gloriously shine through. Have you ever had a groundbreaking idea, a passion project, or a significant piece of work that was unfairly dismissed, appropriated, or stolen by someone in a position of power or influence? How did you find the courage, the resources, and the allies to fight for the recognition and justice you deserved? Share your powerful, inspiring stories of intellectual resilience, ethical battles, and the ultimate vindication of truth in the comments section below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more compelling, in-depth tales of overcoming adversity, challenging injustice, and the enduring triumph of integrity in every field of human endeavor. Remember, the universe itself is built on immutable laws of truth and order. Sometimes we just have to fight a little harder to ensure our small corner of it reflects that same beautiful, inviolable integrity. Thank you from the very bottom of my star-dusted heart for joining me on this extraordinary, often turbulent but ultimately exhilarating journey to Viridian 1 and beyond.